Good afternoon, and welcome to the launch of the 7th edition of the Global Circularity Gap Report. I'm Yvonne Boyo, CEO of Circular Economy Foundation, and very happy to be here today with our partner Deloitte. Circular Economy Foundation is the global impact organization behind the annual report, and it's a privilege to host today.
Hi, and I am Dieuwertje Ewalts. I'm the Circularity Lead for Deloitte Netherlands. Building a circular world is one of the 4 systemic challenges that Deloitte has embraced to make an impact that matters. The much-needed material transition towards a circular and a sustainable world requires working together beyond the boundaries of your own organization. And that's why I'm very happy to be again on stage with Circular Economy to launch the next version of the Circularity Gap Report and also celebrate the continuation of our collaboration. As with the CGR 23, we are again bringing you this year's report live from our studios in Amsterdam. And in the preparation for this, we decided to also bring into account a couple of circularity strategies to make this event go a little bit more smoother than last year. So first of all, of course, reusing the format from last year, because in general it was good. But secondly, reducing it a bit slightly to 1 hour instead of 1.5, because it was a tad long. And thirdly, important for me, we rethought the panel. Last year we had 2 people dialing in, and obviously the rehearsals went well. In practice, not so. So hopefully this year, no technical hiccups with these applied R strategies. So let me guide you through the next hour. What can you expect? So first of all, we will have Fraser giving you all the ins and outs of this year's gap report. And then we will go to our panel, where we have Hege Sæbjørnsen from IKEA and Andrea Liverani from the World Bank sharing their story towards circularity. Obviously, we hope to have an interactive panel, so if you have any questions for them, please put them in the chat, and then our moderators will make sure that we will see them.
We hope that the panel will inspire you to put theory into action, because although circular economy is becoming mainstream, global circularity is still in decline. We need you, industry leaders, policymakers, but also financial institutions, to agree on a data-centered circular roadmap to accelerate a socially just transition to an operational economy within the planetary boundaries. Circular Economy Foundation will continue our work to deliver on our mission, which is to increase the global circularity to 17%. We need you to make that happen. Let's work together to provide decision makers with that data-centered circular economy roadmap, but also to ensure that the financial flows to incentivize circular solutions and also to enable key actors to implement those circular solutions. Let's dive into the insights from the Circularity Gap Report 2024. Fraser, Circular Economy's head of R&D, and one of the lead authors of the report will guide you through it. Matt, please share with the audience how to walk the talk, because it's time to put theory into action.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. Let me start off. We really began our journey about 5 years ago, 2018, with the launch of the first Circularity Gap Report. It was a pioneering effort really to monitor the state of global circularity as the topic gained momentum. Just 5 years in, the amount of discussions, debates, and articles around the topic have tripled. Yet at the same time, we've seen a steady decline in actual circularity from 9.1% to just last year, 7.2%. So much of this actually has to do with the speed at which our global economy is consuming materials. In that same 5-year period, we've consumed 500 billion tons of materials, and that's just about equivalent to what the amount consumed in the entirety of the 20th century in just 5 years. These statistics really display the cold, hard truth that despite the traction, despite the speeches, we're not seeing actionable action on the ground, nor measurable impact. And this really comes at a time when we couldn't need circularity more. Last year, I was standing just here announcing that we need 16 circular solutions to reverse the overshoot of planetary boundaries, but furthermore, actually meet human needs with about a third less materials. Let me show you why that's important. This graph that you see here behind me shows you the familiar trend of human development. So as human development increases, moves across to the right, so does material consumption. But we've actually reached a unique point in history where continued material consumption, especially in the rich world, the richer nations, doesn't equate to the same increases in well-being. When we also imagine replicating that same development pattern for low and middle-income countries, that's going to be devastating to Earth's life support systems. We've already passed 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries. What we need is a system that can actually bend this curve, delivering well-being, moving people across to the right without the necessary increase in material consumption. And how do we do that? It really is through materials management, using less for longer, tapping into regenerative resources, but also cycling materials over multiple life cycles. That's the promise of a circular economy. In this year's report, we've taken a bold move. We shift from exploring the what into the how. Instead of announcing a new circularity metric today, we really scratched our heads and figured out, or tried to look into, what do we fundamentally need to change about the system? How do we address the root causes and change the rules of the game? We've identified 3 key enablers that we believe can bring about this change. The first is creating a level policy playing field, developing policies that incentivize circular solutions and sustainable solutions while obviously penalizing harmful and linear ones. Crucially, also building circular expertise and skills, educating our workforce in circularity to usher in a just transition toward a circular economy, also ensuring decent livelihoods are well distributed across our societies. And finally, getting the economics right. This is really a crucial one, adjusting fiscal policies to create true prices and leveraging investments so that money can flow into circular solutions and we can achieve the scale that we need. So policy, jobs, and finance. How do we focus on these enablers? Well, last year, we've shown that actually just 4 key systems lead to the majority of the overshoot of planetary boundaries: nutrition, housing, mobility, and manufacturing. We must also recognize that different countries have different challenges and different starting points. And what we try to do is actually sort of dig through the entire toolbox of circularity to ensure that grow countries can stabilize their consumption and production, that build countries can really grow using circular economy principles, and crucially, that also shift countries can reduce their consumption. What we've done is identified enablers for 12 solutions that we feel actually really speak to each of the different contexts of different countries and really allow them a unique pathway to accelerate circularity. I'm really excited to share some of these enablers with you, but also really to hit on some of the key case studies and success stories of actually what's already out there and what's already working. Let's dive into shift countries. So shift countries, I mentioned high-income nations consuming more than double the average of global materials. The key here is really actually reducing overconsumption and focusing really on activities that uphold well-being. This is certainly no easy feat, but reimagining the manufacturing sector will certainly be at the core of this journey. In our report, we've identified very promising enablers, innovative policies that set standards for material efficiency, product lifetime, leveraging just transition funds to make sure that workers are trained and educated in circular solutions, but also taxation reform to bring about things like true pricing. A really fantastic example of this is actually what's happening here in the EU. So the right to repair legislation, which obliges manufacturers to make repair an option, but also gives consumers a wide range of rights and practical tools, ultimately making repair and remanufacturing easy and affordable. It's expected that this one piece of legislation would save around 176 billion euros and about 18 million tons of CO2 over the next 15 years. And this is just for the EU, so we're talking about 27 nations. Just imagine the impact that such a piece of legislation could have if all 195 nations were to adopt it. If we move into grow countries, middle-income countries, obviously these countries are transforming rapidly. Aspiring to high-income lifestyles, they already have a significant impact on the planet. The food system is actually a really interesting system here because it's presents an enormous opportunity to scale regenerative practices, also producing economic benefits to both food producers but also communities. Again, we draw on a wide range of exciting enablers. Policies here that both focus on enforcing healthy planetary diets, minimizing food waste, but also really investigating economic incentives that promote regenerative agriculture and ensure that farmers can move towards that with the necessary skills and education. A really great case study here is actually a public-private partnership called Cocoa Action Brazil. It does actually a lot of this. It helps producers increase their yield sustainably while expanding agroforestry and land conservation, and crucially also increasing access to funding so that farmers can make the necessary on-the-ground investments and make the change happen. In just the past 5 years, this initiative has increased farmers' access to credit by over 240%. They've also worked with the ILO to set up standards for better working conditions and living conditions for their communities. And finally, build countries. Build countries really need to prioritize human development. These are low-income countries, and certainly a lot of resources will go into building all kinds of infrastructure to meet basic standards of living. This also really presents an opportunity for the built environment when you think about the infrastructure needed for healthcare, education, sanitation, housing, and one of the key systems that we look at for this country profile is just that. A really great example to highlight here is actually what happens in Rwanda. Just last year, they launched their Circular Economy Action Plan, and one of the key systems that they've targeted was the built environment for just this reason. What's interesting here is that Rwanda is the second highest growing country in Africa, and a lot of their infrastructure, a lot of their cities will explode in the coming years and decades. So getting development patterns, policies right now can have a massive spillover benefit in the years and the decades to come. What they've pointed out is in their action plan is 3 key policies. One is encoding circular economy principles through all zoning laws, making sure that that's adopted throughout the country. Also prioritizing regenerative and local building materials and construction types, but also setting up national guidelines for construction and demolition waste. I think what's exciting about this is that all of the foundational ingredients are now locked into place. So I think Rwanda will be a very interesting country to watch in the coming years and decades. So for the first time, I'm quite proud to say that our Circularity Gap Report really moves beyond the what and develops out a roadmap, the individual ingredients of a roadmap for actually how to implement circular economy at scale. I'm really excited by all the different enablers that we point out, whether that's jobs, policy, or finance, and I definitely encourage you to read the full report. But I think what I would like to do is just leave you with a few key thoughts at a high level of where we need to go. I think first is actually shifting the goalposts of development itself towards really achieving that sweet spot of well-being within boundaries. We need to also recognize that materials are really central to achieving that formula and hitting that bullseye. I think the second point is really recognizing that economics drives so much of what we see around us and actually investing very much in aligning economic incentives around the goals of circularity will pay dividends in terms of allowing the private sector and financiers to roll out funding and really put circularity into practice. I mentioned also that nations really have different challenges, have different starting points, and clearly, like in climate change, we need to work together. realigning international financial and trade architecture will ensure that each type of nation really has the means to make the necessary investments to scale circularity over the coming years and decades. Finally, we really need to make sure that this transition is a just one. Let's ensure that aligning environmental goals doesn't go with sacrificing social goals. It's really important that we achieve a harmonious and equitable transition and not just a circular one at the same time. So with that, I would like to thank you very much and certainly encourage you to download and read the full report. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. And I think we can move on to the panel. So thanks for all of the insights. Obviously, it was a pleasure working again with you on the report. So I think I have a little bit more of a headway than the people at home. Let's dive into some of those questions that probably people have later. I think one of the things that of course, the report is all about moving from theory to action. And we all know it isn't easy. You know, it requires vision, creativity, perseverance. It's in theory, we know what the benefits are of a circular world. Getting there in practice, that's something we still need to figure out, especially on the global scale. And that's why I'm very happy to have Hege here from IKEA, who will actually share with us some insights on her journey within IKEA to move to a circular world and see how we can really do that on a global scale. Hege is the Global Circularity Strategy Lead at Inca Group, so the retail part of IKEA, obviously the largest furniture retailer in the world. So if anyone knows how to do things on a global scale, I think it is Hege. So please share with your story and we'll dive into the questions and afterwards. Reminder for everyone online, you can share them in the chat.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction. Am I standing on the right spot so I'm not in the way? Really good to be here. It's always a pleasure to be amongst like-minded, of course, and people who are trying to, together, tackle some of the biggest challenges that we face. And we've been on this journey for some time, and we've made some learnings, some of which in 5 minutes I'll try to share with you, but I would say that it's probably just skimming the surface of some of the things that we're doing and some of the things we're learning. But my name is Hege. I work as Global Circular Strategy Leader for Inca Group. And of course, you will have known, most likely, about IKEA. We are the world's biggest furniture company, but we are also not necessarily the biggest, we don't necessarily have the biggest market share in all our markets. So it's an interesting dichotomy where we are a big global player with a huge amount of influence, and yet we also are, in many markets, a smaller player. So it's a really interesting dynamic. And I just want to say thank you, first of all, to the Circular Economy for the report. A report is only as good as how it's applied and how it's used in practice. And we have to say that for 2 years now, we've really taken a huge amount of learnings from it. It's helped us to segment markets and frame different opportunities in ways that we didn't have before. So thank you for that up front. And I just wanted to say also to really support the focus this year on the how. It's really all about action. It's about the roadmaps. It's about taking the actions in measurable ways to understand where the biggest impacts are. And although IKEA has been around for 80 years, and last year was a big year of both celebration and reflection for us. We were 80 years last year. And you can sort of track the linear model of success of linear businesses in the time that we've existed. And the world was very different when we started. The world didn't have businesses that provided low-cost, affordable, well-made, sustainably designed furniture for the many, and there was a need for that at the time. You argue there is a need today, but the world is very different. The world is not today how it was in the last 80 years, and the future will be a very different future. And we heard, of course, Matt touch on that as well, and I won't touch on those messages, but of course the resource-rich past that we've arguably got used to as an economy is no longer the future that we face, and we have very different opportunities and challenges. And just to share that we have, from a sustainability strategy perspective, these 4 different areas in our strategic approach to how we have set out becoming a people and planet positive business. It's how we become a climate positive and net positive business. It's how we mainstream sustainable and healthy living. It's how we become a circular business or a more circular business, and also how we drive a fair and equal business and value creation across our value chain. And I think it's important to highlight maybe in this instance that circularity, even if in the way it's communicated, even on this slide, looks like it sits in a nice box in a silo alongside the other topics. But of course, it's a tool, it's a how in itself for how we will meet our climate goals, how we will meet our nature goals, and how, in fact, we will remain a resilient, commercially viable, relevant business for the future. And this is a really critical point, and this is something I work on and others in my business every day. It's still anchored in our sustainability strategy, but it's a business transformation agenda. It's how we come up with new business models, new products, new solutions across our value chain, and certainly in the consumer-facing domain. And just to sort of highlight from a business perspective, we are the practitioners. We need to take the research and the tools and the framings and apply it in action. And we know the devastating realities around the environment, biodiversity loss, pollution, inequality. But it's really important, as the report states, that the business case is clear. And we know already that, and there's no specific numbers here for a reason, because your business and the different sectors will be different, but we already know that the cost of inaction is enormous. Even simply looking at legislation, legal mandatories, EPR alone is costing millions today. So the idea of seeing it as a sustainability direction alone is something I really want to address straight off. We also know, and depending on the sector, depending on the business, that actually customers won't choose brands in the future that don't provide these solutions. And the opportunities are huge as well. So just touching again, I think I have 1 minute left, which is not long, but to really sort of summarize this slide, we have an ecosystem approach of initiatives across our total value chain, and we have to take a systemic approach to how we look at the totality. This is maybe one of the biggest transformations from a leadership, from a skills, from a mindset perspective that businesses need to, and all sectors need to address. It's a systemic approach where you mobilize and galvanize your key competencies across the value chain, across the business. And hopefully you can see that starting from design, starting with materials, having a huge focus on how that will meet our climate targets, but nevertheless really driving from a retail perspective how we create behavior change around scaling up solutions for prolonging the life of products. Right now, I have about 30 people in my business across 5 different functions, co-creating what a repair scheme should look like. So this is also about mobilizing support across the business. And just in sort of a nutshell, is to look at, we need to work together across a long-term agenda. We need a vision, we need to measure, we need to have metrics. The policies that need to be there to allow businesses to make financial investments that are confident and long-term. And I just wanted to highlight that we have already worked with Deloitte and Circular Economy on metrics, measurement frameworks. We're partnering also with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development around a new global circular protocol. We need to have unified definitions and speak the same language so we know what success looks like together. And also just one positive message. It is complex. It can be very challenging. But actually, what I see in our business, it mobilizes an enormous amount of innovation, energy, and leadership. And our co-workers want to work with us for that reason. Do we have challenges? Absolutely. Do we have all the answers? Not yet, but we are working on it. So we're mobilizing our co-workers across the business to solve them. Thank you.
Thank you, Hege. Very inspiring, and I think also your message, mobilizing everyone across the businesses. I spoke to someone this week just about the simple implementation of going from single-use cups to reusable cups. And he mentioned everyone in the organization is affected, all departments, from people on the ground until the accounting department, because all of a sudden you're going from an operational expenditure to a capital expenditure. So again, everyone needs to be involved. So I really recognize that. And thanks for sharing also that your journey has started within IKEA, but definitely still a bumpy road probably ahead. One of the enablers, of course, in the report is finance. And it's not just financing solutions within a particular organization, but it's also enabling solutions and financing solutions across the world. And so get the economics right, not just within one country, but within the world. So I think there's a clear role here for international financial institutions like the World Bank, and that's why I'm very happy that we have Andrea Liverani here. He is the, let me say this right, the lead specialist in the World Bank's environmental, natural resources and the blue economy's global practice. So thank you for sharing your story, and Andrea will also be the final person on the panel today. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat.
Thank you, Dee. And listen, it's an incredible honor to be here today. I was asked to tell a personal story of my journey towards circularity. I think it very much started at a very specific point in time where I was trying to make sense of it all, and the Circularity Gap Report was one of the very good pieces of analysis. I think it was the 2018 or the 2019 report. And since then, we had the chance to collaborate with Circular Economy on a number of dimensions, and it's really a great opportunity. Thanks for being here. Obviously, my journey is not just a professional, personal journey, it's a journey within an institution. I work with colleagues, we work with teams, we don't achieve anything personally. And forgive me if I mix my professional journey with the journey of the institution, perhaps. Actually, I was delighted to hear that the World Bank is slightly younger than IKEA. I don't think we are 80 years old, just about 75. We were born with a very specific, the institution was born with a very specific mandate, which was the reconstruction of Europe after the war. That mandate evolved into a growth and development mandate, accompanying the decolonization process in the 60s, turned into a very specific focus on poverty reduction and vulnerability attenuation. And then in the 90s, with a specific pinpoint of the Rio conference, the bank really embraced the environmental sustainability agenda. And I joined a few years later when the institution was trying to grapple with how climate was also a development agenda. I had the chance to end up working on the WDR on climate and development in 2010, and spent the rest of my professional life trying precisely to implement the kind of ideas and suggestions that we put in WDR. Only when I had the luck of being posted in Brussels, I had to confront what the circularity agenda. So my professional journey is pretty brief. But what I realized back then is that it is so central to these major challenges that, as an institution, the bank is trying really to make core to its business today. We know that it's at the center of the triple crisis of climate, pollution, and biodiversity, that those are symptoms of a much more fundamental problem. But at the same time, I also found, frankly, that the discourse was very shrouded in a focus on the private sector and technology solutions. I found that some of the barriers were, confined to access to finance, while the economics of the agenda still had to be really be put to the test. And also that the role of governments was not really yet developed at the time, and I'm very, very chuffed to see the importance of policy in this year's CGR. And obviously the fact that this was once again a massive developmental agenda, rife with inequality type of issues, both within countries and across countries, with the cost of inaction today largely accruing on the poorest, including on developing countries, a huge inequity in the distribution of material use and consumption, and at the same time, some of the repercussions and the implications of the policies that certain countries are putting in place now probably ended up having a potentially negative economic effects on the poor, the vulnerable, in those countries and across those countries. So we thought of trying to put these all together. We ended up with another little kind of policy piece. And I think my journey from now on is, in addition to remaining a climate guy, to try to implement some of those ideas and practices that we put together in that report in 2018. The bank has been involved in different elements of the circular economy agenda for decades, particularly municipal waste. My first operation I worked on was municipal waste and recycling. We have an enormous experience. On certain sectors, on energy efficiency, for instance, we have experience throughout the world. But today we see a true emergence of demand from our client countries, our member countries. We are a demand-driven organization for operation and support focused really on circularity per se. I was in Turkey last week. The country's put the circularity agenda within its own Green Deal. It's putting in place an ambitious, very ambitious action plan with support to private sector and municipalities to address these challenges. Obviously, countries like China are at the leading edge with a number of very exciting solutions. So I believe that the trajectory of the bank going forward is going to be very much present on the circular economy agenda. I believe that many of you will intersect with our path in that direction. So thank you very much for having us here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And so I think we have our panel complete. So let's deep dive into some questions. And what I really liked about this year's report is that we took some of the insights, of course, from last year, especially on the country profiles. And I think Andrea also mentioned that, the cost of inaction, probably it affects the poorest countries the most. And so that's why also you see different actions and different solutions needed for all three of the country profiles. You touched upon, Matt, some of the solutions already in your presentation, but could you deep dive a little bit more on, for instance, for the built environment or for others, how that differs between the different country profiles?
Yeah, certainly. So I think that's, of course, what I tried to mention very briefly was we really tried to open up the entire toolbox of circularity to see kind of what solutions, what strategies were really appropriate for different types of countries. I think you brought up construction, the built environment. I think one of the key differences, if you look at kind of shift nations, high-income nations, is we have a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the buildings already in place. It's about how do we sort of maximize their utilization, how do we actually reuse them, adaptive reuse, things like that. Those really come to mind. Whereas I also brought up the country of Rwanda, rapidly growing country, a lot of their infrastructure and built environment will only be, let's say, formally developed and scaled in the years to come. So there we really look at, how do we enshrine, as they've done, codes around construction, waste and demolition, procurement, really making sure that those kind of fundamental skeleton building blocks are already in place. So I think that does kind of speak to the different contexts of different nations, kind of based on where they're sitting along that development curve.
Okay. And, of course, if you look at repurposing, I'm always very proud of the building that we're in. It used to be a garage, and we have kept certain elements, but also repurposed it to be offices, which we're sharing also with other companies. So we also maximize the utilization of it. I think it's clear if you mention Rwanda, it's a different setup. You still need to build a lot of things. Andrea, you just mentioned China, and I know you've done a lot of study as well on developing countries and what they need. So also from your point of view, what would be key opportunities for those countries to already incorporate the circular solutions while they are building not just the infrastructure, but actually the whole country?
Yeah, thanks, Dee. I think, first of all, congratulations to the CGR team for this very useful differentiation of countries' characteristics. And the other dimension, I think that every country comes to this agenda from a difficult kind of domestic perspective. Some of them from an environmental sustainability agenda, some of them from a trade agenda, others from a kind of resource security agenda, where the resource scarcity. And I think you can plug different country groups in that one. There are a number of very exciting public-driven programs being thought through, already implemented in countries, ranging from China to Chile to Turkey. A small activity, but an exciting one, which we implemented recently, is on Croatia. It's exactly on the construction sector and how to make it more circular. It's important, once again, to think about where the opportunities lies, as you say. And, in our view, the opportunities lies in making the economics right. Very many countries today do not still have a landfill tax in place. It's difficult to move to circularity when consuming, wasting, and disposing of materials is actually free. Very few countries today have incorporated life cycle cost assessments in their public procurement practices, with public procurement typically responsible for 15 to 20, sometimes 25% of GDP in certain developing countries, and no elements of circularity there. It's very difficult to create markets for new upcoming firms. And lastly, we know that fiscal systems, both in developed and developing countries, are still heavily geared against circularity. Value-added tax systems tax materials every time they're looped in, and subsidies subsidize extraction and consumption. Unless we reverse those fundamentals policies at their core, it's going to be more difficult to see substantial gains beyond niche and specific sectors. Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's get the economics right. I think that is very important, especially, of course, also for corporate businesses like IKEA. You mentioned you are present in so many countries. It differs. So how can you look at all of those different countries and get the economics right for circular business models in each one of them while still maintaining a global brand? That must be a daily challenge almost.
Yeah, I think that's like the golden egg to try and solve that one. But I think just the picture I showed earlier, if we come back to that, to really understand the ecosystem. And there are business models and incentives across the total value chain, right? It's not one business case for the totality. And I think what we try to do, of course, is, first of all, starting to look at where our impact sits, and that's where we've been focused, have a lot of our focus around the material use, really shifting the use of materials in our products, not to just regenerative sources, but also recycled content. But using as an example, just building on what you're saying there, Andrea, we invested already in 2018 in a mattress recycling facility here, actually, in Haarlem, just outside Amsterdam. And at the time, it was viable to do so because the incentive and the policy landscape in Holland allowed us to have enough of confidence to invest in this business. And now we have 4 factories in Holland, and we're expanding to the UK and Belgium. But of course, it takes this policy levers to enable the confidence to scale. And then I would say, again, it's of course the economics, the policy levers, but it's also to really understand that the consumer sentiment's changing as well. So to remain relevant, for example, in the Nordics, we're already seeing that if we are not present in a pretty aggressive second-hand market, we are going to lose out big time. So there are so many levers to pull on, and I think it's important that the business and the sector that's looking at their value chain really understands what they're missing out on if they don't do a bit of analysis around the long term. To change it.
And I think you're actually also answering a question that came online, is how to convince businesses to implement circular solutions even though they are more costly than baseline technologies and solutions. And yeah, it might be an investment now, but if you're not doing it at one point, either from a supply chain perspective, can you still get materials? Are your customers still willing to go to you? So, plan ahead, think ahead of the curve. And I think also from a moral perspective, I think you also, if you have the needs of the means to do so, lead that, because global solutions in the end is also what we definitely need. I think also partnerships have come up a couple of times. Working together, working beyond the boundaries of your own organization. Does the World Bank have any key partnerships that they are leading or that can really make a difference in this field? Yeah,
I think first of all, I said before, we are a member country-driven organization, so pretty much everything we do always entails a partnership with, in my case, I work on the public sector side of the World Bank. It involves a partnership with the government authority, with the government agencies, or multiple government agencies. My colleagues from the IFC, the private sector side, basically deal with the private sector. But I think the role of the bank in this sphere and in others is also to facilitate partnerships, right? This is a complex agenda, clearly. It's a multi-actor agenda. Think of the private sector per se. There is no single firm today, based on the way the economy is structured, that can decide to implement a purely circular product on its own. Firms are embedded in input-output relationship. It's a value chain, is a sectoral type of perspective. We think that firms like IKEA, that are very often lead global value chain type of leaders, have a massive role in leading that chain, in partnering up with the chain, and facilitating change across that one. The agenda is going to be a trade partnership agenda where future trade agreements, free trade agreements, will need to incorporate negotiations around what does it mean to insert circularity clauses in this type of dimension. We certainly facilitate partnership within governments. Again, governments are not necessarily tooled to think, develop policy and implement policy around circularity, because very often this straddles across different sectors, different ministers and agencies, and there's an element of vertical coordination between central and other. Well, let me finish by saying that we also, as an institution, we're not alone. There are a number of international financial institutions, multilateral development banks, and a very positive sign at the last World Circular Economy Forum in Helsinki last year is that a number of directors from the different institutions came together and decided to join hands and also think of common approaches and common solutions to partner in different countries towards making a real change in that effort. So, yeah.
Well, and I think also we try to contribute also to the conversation with the report, and I think especially this one and shows some of those key enablers, policy being one, finance being one, and the third one being skills, where I see that there are a lot of comments actually coming in the chat about skills, education, etc. How can you use it as an accelerator? Matt, care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad that came up. So one of the key enablers in our report was looking at jobs as a lever. Often it's sort of overlooked. I mean, policy and finance are kind of obvious ones, but actually what is maybe a little bit surprising is, all of these circular economy solutions sound, maybe quite well known. The people to execute on them and actually make them a reality actually does require a huge amount of training, upskilling, all of the above, really, when it comes to really kind of retooling supply chains at scale. So the role of education, the role of training, professional training, is actually a huge lever that we really try to hit on in every country profile and in every system. So the short answer there is that the role is very big. And in fact, at Circular Economy Foundation, we have an entire program dedicated to bringing knowledge and bringing tools into that space. It's a very oft sort of looked over enabler, but a huge one if we really want to make these big transitions across the 4 systems happen.
Clear? Any?
Yeah, no, I can contribute to that. I think it's what we see is that we're developing a custom learning offer that really looks at what is relevant for each function, so that we take this quite abstract concept and make it real and tangible. And that really needs to be relevant to people's roles and in their jobs, so they can get this sense of mastery of what does it mean for me? How can I activate it in my sphere of influence? And of course, to have a learning offer that allows co-workers to go deeper if they so wish, and really kind of make that easy for them. But I think it's also not to underestimate the importance of an inspiring future to live into. And we see that again and again. We can get lost in technicalities, detail, minutiae, particularly when you start uncovering reporting legislations and all sorts of wonderful details and depths of spreadsheets that you never knew existed. But then to actually lift it up and to remember to create this inspiring destination and the journey that we're on. So the combination of making it easy, making it applicable to people's lived experience, and yet with a visionary end goal. So that's something we're working on at the moment.
And maybe actually I can jump in, because last year's report was really about how can circular economy solutions bring us back within planetary boundaries. I think the other piece that I tried to bring in here was that also needs to be an element of well-being. We also need to have that aspirational future. And I think very much on that meta scale, it is really about, scouting out a just transition. We know that there will be massive transformations, not only in the energy system, but in the 4 systems that I mentioned. So, can we get ahead of that? Actually, can we sort of scout how to make that a just transition for our workforce, but also just people at large?
And I think also sharing the fact that circular economy can also, it's not just, okay, it's more costly or I need to give up something, but there are also fun elements or other elements. So, how to create that level of well-being with less use of resources. And education, I think, of the consumer is also very important in that. Sharing that positive narrative. I don't think we shouldn't underestimate how important that is. And not just from a circularity perspective, you also see it for climate, but sharing that positive narrative, okay, where it is that we're going, what is that vision? Otherwise people get lost, and make it practical. And I'm currently involved in a lot of discussions on waste, how to minimize it, but we need to make it easy as well for consumers, and not, people leaning over a garbage bin with 5 different boxes thinking, okay, where do I drop this? Make it easy, and don't depend on huge changes coming from people needing to make knowledgeable choices, because it's different. We need to make it, the worst choice needs to become easier, needs to become better.
And just to add to that, I think, of course, we are a consumer-facing brand. We have an enormous platform to influence that story and that change. And we research together with GlobeScan across all our markets every second year. And even today, you would not think this is still the case, but people are still confused about the right thing to do. They still perceive that it's too expensive. They still find it confusing what the most impactful things are. So I think this combination of simplifying it, making it affordable, making it relatable, and yet also really this story around you're not compromising your well-being and your aspirations. There will be some changes, no doubt, but it nevertheless needs to be part of this, meeting the well-being needs that we all have.
Yeah. Well, and from that perspective, I really loved the Green Friday ads, at least in the Netherlands, and from IKEA. I think it's part of a broader global campaign, right?
We started a few years ago, and again, it comes back to how do you get started? We don't take one big leap straight away for all markets. So the campaign started really with the idea of, can we mobilize everyone around secondhand and looking after things as a complete opposite to Black Friday. So it started with a campaign idea, and that has really worked for us, and we continue with that. And it's as simple as an idea to say, keep good things going. And then it's up to allowing, and depending if it's global brands listening or other sectors, but to really give the tools and the narratives for companies and markets to make it their own in their markets, make it fun, make it engaging. But I'm really glad to hear that it caught your attention.
It was, I think, one of the very positive ones I heard last November. Andrea, I see a question in the chat coming from to you. You mentioned coalitions between the public and the private sector, and I think there are people online curious if you can share some successful examples on that.
Yeah. Okay. Let me start from this. Let me start from this country. I think the Netherlands are probably partly based on its political culture, has been at the forefront of putting together these sectoral pacts, really driven by the public sector setting clear targets, bringing together chambers of commerce, sectoral chambers of commerce, and lead firms in the different sectors to try to come together with commonly shared, broadly shared targets regarding material reduction within the sector in their own operation. This is a very useful experience, which I believe the Netherlands should export much more. I suspect that in certain settings will be more promising than in others, simply because of the complexities. But other countries, I mentioned a couple of them. A lot of these is about transaction costs. Okay. And proximity is a way of eliminating some of those transaction costs. And this is about physical proximity and also virtual proximity. Anything that the public sector can do to reduce the distance between actors, including private sector actors, is an important one. And you see countries like China, but also Turkey, Chile, others, investing substantial amounts of money in eco-industrial parks that today take a material exchange between firms situated in those industrial parks into perspective. I think it's an important element of public-private partnership. And then, you know, the organization of secondary material markets. It's massively linking today. We know that it's not just a matter of price of secondary materials. Very often they cost more, but also simply that there is no actual market, or the market is so fragmented and dispersed that you cannot have a nationwide scrapyard to kind of draw upon, but this is very locally. And I think a country like China is really at the cutting edge of creating such secondary material markets. So these are some of the collaboration opportunities that the public and the private sector have.
I think I read that also China is really ahead of the curve in some areas, especially on the energy transition, where I think their current strategy is to be fully circle with batteries and all the materials needed for the energy transition by 2059, whereas in Europe and in the US, I think aiming at 2070. So hopefully everyone can bring that number down obviously, but I think that's still quite showing the ambition. Although I must say I'm a bit proud, of course, that you start with mentioning the Netherlands first. And perhaps that's also not surprising then that Circle Economy is headquartered in Amsterdam and that we're also hosting this from Amsterdam. So I am proud of a lot of the examples that we have in the Netherlands. So hopefully we can also stay ahead of the curve from that perspective. Any questions also to someone in the room here? Yes. Don't want to miss out on the live audience that we have here.
Hello, I'm Hielke Simonides from AVB, a potato starch producer in the Netherlands. We have a lot of ideas always in the company to become more circular, but we always struggle on how to prioritize. So what things to do and what not. Would you have recommendations for us?
Well, I can share a bit about how we go about it. And again, depends on where you are in the value chain, of course. But as I mentioned, the early driver for circularity was very much understanding where our climate footprint sat, and knowing that 50% or so of our climate footprint sit in materials, extraction, manufacturing. So it was a sort of a no-brainer to start there and early on. Also knowing that, of course, the product end of life. And that was sort of where things got momentum, and therefore also looking at where is there energy in the business for us. So really seeing that, of course, the customer sentiment, the innovation capacity in the business around really prolonging product life, the design side. So that was part of where we really got momentum. Then I would say, and I think I've touched on this, in the current climate, just even the cost, doing a quick calculation of cost of inaction when it comes to potential 4% of your turnover, by the way, can be your penalty if you don't meet greenwashing legislations, right? So there's all kinds of dimension that you can do a sort of calculation around. And also, where are the markets coming in? What are the demands? What are the opportunities around your sector? That's how we've approached it. And again, looking at the market, we don't have one global approach to circularity potentially, right? So it's, again, being market specific about where the real sort of opportunities are.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thomas Marinelli from Signify. Maybe more philosophical question. So thank you for the report. I will read it with enthusiasm and also for the examples. I was thinking, I like the idea about bringing the story more positive, especially this time, that is leading to my question. I see there's a lot of turbulence in the market. There's wars around. There's also pressure politically, because you heard that in Europe, Europe is also a movement to the right wing, where they say there's criticism about too much on environment. So my question is, how do we keep this pool for sustainability, for circularity? How do we keep this pool, although there are signs that maybe in the US and in China there's a little bit pushback?
I think from a lot of angles, there are still you can deep dive into what could be benefits of circularity, supply chain resilience, tapping into new markets, secondhand. but also industrial symbiosis where you work together, the industry park that you have. So I think those are all positive stories you can share despite, I think, of the political landscape. And I think for Europe, with everything going on and the lack of natural resources we have for some materials, especially regarding the energy transition, creating the urgency and the story and saying, hey, this is where you want to be in the future, I think, regardless of where you are on the political landscape, should be, well, for me at least, a positive narrative to tell. But curious.
Well, maybe just very quickly as an extension of what you were saying, I think like also the resilience of what that creates. I mean, if you really sort of develop an architecture of a system that keeps materials in use for longer and that system works very fluidly, you do develop a resistance to big shocks. So a lot of the geopolitical examples that you mentioned. And I think, that is maybe not something that's visible for most people, but that's very much a real thing that keeps sort of a positive framing.
I'll add a perspective. I think bringing it right down to human needs. It's about, I guess, depending on who your audience is and who you're speaking to and who you're trying to reach. I think it's also about really understanding what people's needs and concerns and fears are. Because ultimately, right now, cost of living crisis, we don't go out with a circular message as the main leading message. It's about allowing people to have their needs met in the most cost-effective way based on what they need. And I guess that's sustainability communication 101. It's not about necessarily it's a minority necessarily who actually take the action because they want to be more sustainable. It tends to be other needs. So leading with a message based on people's needs and understanding what those are. And being also honest about it's not all positive at the moment, right? So how can we hold space for those difficult conversations whilst we engage in how to meet people's needs in a complex time?
It's a really good question. It's, once again, probably a question of priorities. There are a number of priorities facing governments today. But it's challenging. Think about one of the most basic measure of circularity that you can think of today. It's around energy efficiency. And for both residential and commercial energy efficiency, payback times of any investments are typically around 6-7 years, really, really quick. And those then accrue into benefits. And still, you find it difficult to convince citizens to invest in energy efficiency in many countries. The wealthy do, but the non-wealthy, they have to put down a down payment and then wait for 7-8 years. They don't. And once again, I think the power of policy is trying to come up with solutions that not only aim to convince and show those benefits so that people get convinced, but try to help the kind of economics and the financing. So in countries where utilities are now paid to help consumers save energy rather than are paid to supply the energy of the consumers, you see a number of measures, like, for instance, the possibility to spread the loan to the initial investment over several years. Other countries simply resort to subsidies. But those solutions exist. Okay, the technology solutions exist. The costs are, in some sectors, incredible for the transition. Typically, those are the sectors where emissions are also very high, hard to abate type of sectors. But it's a matter of priority, and priority setting in government as well as in business is sometimes complicated by other events taking place.
Thanks for your elaborate, I think, answer to the very good question. And I think this is something we can discuss for hours on also after the live stream. And we're actually already, 1 hour is very short perhaps, but we are entering the final 5 minutes of the live stream. So we have a broad audience, both in the room but also online, and everyone has different positions in their own organization. What would be a practical advice that all of you can give to someone to get started in their own organization to move to circularity? And because of the time, try to keep it as short.
I'll let you go first, Andrea.
Thank you. I think for something like this, is the capacity to find a solution or an approach or a specific policy that works and have the courage, the time, the energy to scale it up and demonstrate it elsewhere. It's a long-haul agenda, obviously. It's going to be something that is going to stay with us over the generations, but we need to really make an effort to create a momentum as soon as possible and kind of shock waves so that these type of solutions are, you know, replicated across businesses and across countries. So everything that you can do whenever you have your specific solution, your specific center, make sure that it works and advertise it. That would be, you know, the kind of recommendation for ourselves. This is something that we try to do in our work as well.
Find one thing, tell the story, and scale it.
Yeah.
I'll build on what I've already shared around trying to understand your biggest impact depending on the sector, and yet saying that, not let perfection stop action, because we do not have the right data that we need. We do not have the level of granularity to inform ourselves with 100% confidence. So to know enough to take action and learn by doing, and nevertheless also be both humbly but also openly sharing of the journeys we're on, and mobilizing where there is energy in the given business. I think it's more important to get going with the information that we have than to sit and wait for perfection.
I think that's great. A hard act for me to follow. Actually, one thing that I always do say is that a lot of these examples, I always feel a little bit silly for standing up, broadcasting these examples, because they are kind of no-brainers in the end. And actually, as you both said, I think it really is about kind of seeing what works and how to scale that. In a sense, I think that would be also my advice is kind of, you know, don't reinvent the wheel, but actually just look at what's already working and see how to add that extra little bit of top spin that will give it that much more momentum.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one final thing, I think also sharing what doesn't work so others can also prevent making those same mistakes. So don't reinvent the wheel, but also don't reinvent the 15 wheels that don't work. Or try to do that. So with that, we're coming to near the end. So Yvonne, I would like to invite you to come stand behind the desk with us so we are all together and you can do the final closure.
Right. Thank you. Very insightful discussions. This year's CGR calls upon governments and industry leaders to move from theory into action. We're also very proud of the spin-out that happened last year from Circular Economy Foundation. We launched Circular Economy Consulting to exactly help, like the question from the audience, where to start, what to do, what to prioritize. It's very important to have an approach that fits your needs. Not every sector is the same, not every country is the same. The environment is different. The policies that you have to work with are different. So with that, the consulting team is also enabling those businesses. And we're very proud today to announce that in addition to our current partnership on the Circularity Gap Report, Circular Economy Consulting is working very closely in a partnership with Deloitte, which will also be announced in a press release today. With that, I think it's a time for us to close the live stream at least, but thank you all for being here. The full report is, as Matthew said, available online. It's in the chat. My colleagues have dropped the link there. Else follow us on LinkedIn. We look forward, of course, to see you again next year for the Circularity Gap Report 2025. Thank you.
Thank you all.